On the cold night of March 15, 1988, the Central Illinois Railway line operated as it had for decades, moving passengers and freight through the heartland of America. The 10:47 p.m. express train departed Chicago's Union Station right on schedule, carrying 47 passengers toward Springfield. At the controls sat Michael Thompson, a 42-year-old conductor with 17 years of impeccable service. He had checked in for his shift at 9:30 p.m., completed his pre-departure inspection, and radioed dispatch with his standard all-clear report. Nothing about that evening suggested it would be his final journey. "So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from." Michael Thompson was known throughout the railway company as a model employee. Colleagues described him as methodical, safety-conscious, and utterly reliable. His personnel file contained nothing but commendations. At home in the Chicago suburb of Oak Park, his wife Jennifer and their 2 teenage children awaited his return, as they had countless times before. Michael's routine was predictable. He would arrive home around 4 a.m., sleep until noon, and spend afternoons with his family. It was a life built on consistency and trust. The train made its scheduled stops at Joliet and Pontiac without incident. At each station, Michael performed his duties with characteristic precision, checking tickets, ensuring passenger safety, and communicating with station personnel. The assistant conductor on duty that night, working in a different car, later reported that everything seemed normal during these stops. The weather conditions were clear, the track signals showed green, and the locomotive performed flawlessly. At 12:18 a.m., Michael made his final radio contact with the dispatch center. His voice was calm and professional as he reported passing through the small town of Lexington, confirming the train's position and speed. The dispatcher noted nothing unusual in the transmission. 20 minutes later, when the train was expected to check in again approaching the next station, there was only silence. Repeated attempts to raise Michael on the radio went unanswered. When the express train rolled into Springfield Terminal at 1:47 a.m., station workers immediately sensed something was wrong. The locomotive had slowed and stopped according to protocol, the automatic systems functioning perfectly, but there was no conductor to be seen. Security personnel boarded the train and made a disturbing discovery. The conductor's cabin was empty, yet locked from the inside. The door's internal bolt was engaged, something that should have been impossible if Michael had left the compartment. All 47 passengers were accounted for, unharmed and unaware that anything unusual had occurred. Most had been sleeping during the journey's final hour. The initial search of the train revealed Michael's personal belongings exactly where they should be. His lunchbox sat on the small desk, half-eaten sandwich still inside. His thermos of coffee remained warm to the touch. His company-issued radio lay on the console, functioning normally. His jacket hung on its usual hook. Everything suggested he had simply vanished mid-shift, as if he had stepped out for a moment and never returned. But the locked door presented an impossible puzzle that would haunt investigators for decades to come. Railway police secured the scene within the hour. They examined every inch of the locomotive and passenger cars, searching for signs of struggle, blood, or any indication of what had happened. They found nothing. The train's external doors and emergency exits showed no evidence of being opened during the journey. Security protocols required these exits to trigger alarms if used while the train was in motion, and no such alarms had sounded. The windows in the conductor's cabin were intact and locked from inside. By dawn, local police and FBI agents had joined the investigation, treating Michael's disappearance as a potential kidnapping. His family was contacted with the devastating news. Jennifer Thompson, awakened by the knock on her door at 5 a.m., struggled to comprehend what authorities were telling her. Her husband had simply disappeared from a moving train, leaving behind no trace, no note, no explanation. The impossible nature of his vanishing would transform this case into one of the most baffling mysteries in American railway history. And the locked cabin door was just the beginning of the inexplicable details that investigators would uncover. The investigation into Michael Thompson's disappearance intensified throughout the spring of 1988, with detectives pursuing every conceivable lead. The Illinois State Police established a dedicated task force, coordinating with FBI agents who specialized in missing persons cases. Their first priority was reconstructing the final hours of Michael's life, searching for any detail that might explain his impossible vanishing from a locked cabin on a moving train. Investigators conducted exhaustive interviews with all 47 passengers who had been aboard that night. Each person was questioned multiple times, their statements cross-referenced and analyzed for inconsistencies. The passengers provided a frustrating consensus. Nobody had seen or heard anything unusual. Most had been dozing or reading during the final leg of the journey. A few recalled seeing the conductor earlier in the evening, performing his normal duties, checking tickets, and ensuring passenger comfort. None reported any signs of distress or unusual behavior from Michael Thompson. The railway company cooperated fully with the investigation, providing complete access to personnel records, maintenance logs, and communication transcripts. Company officials seemed genuinely baffled by the disappearance. They commissioned an independent safety inspection of the entire train, searching for mechanical failures or structural anomalies that might somehow explain the incident. Engineers examined the locomotive systems, the passenger cars, and every piece of equipment. The inspection revealed nothing out of the ordinary. The train had been functioning perfectly on the night of March 15th. Detectives turned their attention to Michael's personal life, standard procedure in missing persons cases. They interviewed his wife Jennifer extensively, documenting the family's financial situation, marriage quality, and any recent changes in behavior. Jennifer insisted her husband had been happy and stable. Their finances were solid, with no significant debts beyond a modest mortgage. Bank records confirmed her account, showing regular deposits, reasonable expenses, and a growing savings account. There were no large withdrawals, no suspicious transactions, nothing to suggest financial troubles or secret activities. Colleagues at the railway company painted a consistent picture of Michael Thompson as a dedicated professional. His supervisor provided personnel records showing 17 years of excellent service, perfect attendance, and numerous safety commendations. Co-workers described him as friendly but private, someone who took his responsibilities seriously and never complained about the demanding schedule. Several mentioned that Michael often spoke proudly of his family and seemed content with his life. Nobody could recall him expressing concerns, fears, or plans to leave his job. However, one detail emerged that caught investigators' attention. A passenger named Robert Chen, a businessman who frequently traveled the Chicago-Springfield route, remembered something unusual from that night. During a routine stop at Pontiac, approximately 1 hour before Michael's disappearance, Chen had stepped onto the platform to stretch his legs. He noticed the conductor walking along the side of the train, pausing to examine something near the undercarriage. Chen thought nothing of it at the time, assuming it was part of normal safety procedures. But when pressed for details, he recalled that Michael had crouched down, using a flashlight to inspect the area around the wheels and brake mechanisms. The conductor had remained there for several minutes before the train departed. This observation prompted investigators to conduct another detailed examination of the train's exterior, focusing on the areas Michael had apparently been inspecting. Railway engineers found nothing unusual, no damage, no foreign objects, no signs of tampering. Still, the fact that Michael had been inspecting something specific during that stop suggested he might have noticed a problem. Detectives requested the train's maintenance records for the weeks preceding the disappearance, hoping to find evidence of reported issues or scheduled repairs. The breakthrough, or what seemed like one, came 6 weeks into the investigation. While reviewing materials from Michael's work locker, detectives discovered his official conductor's logbook. Railway regulations required conductors to maintain detailed records of each shift, noting times, stops, passenger counts, and any unusual occurrences. Michael's logbook was characteristically meticulous, with neat handwriting documenting his shifts going back several months. But the entries from his final week contained something unexpected. Beginning on March 10th, 5 days before his disappearance, Michael had started adding numerical notations in the margins of his logbook. The numbers appeared to be codes, sequences like 4 to 7B3 or 2 to 9A1 written in small, precise script alongside his regular entries. The codes meant nothing to investigators or to railway officials. They didn't correspond to any standard railway notation system, signal codes, or maintenance protocols. Company supervisors confirmed these markings were not part of normal procedure and had no obvious meaning within railway operations. Cryptography experts from the FBI analyzed the codes, attempting to decipher their significance. They explored various possibilities. Were they tracking something Michael had observed, recording times or locations, documenting some pattern he had noticed? The experts ran the sequences through multiple analytical frameworks, but found no clear pattern or meaning. The codes remained an enigma, a tantalizing clue that seemed important but refused to yield its secrets. Jennifer Thompson examined the codes but could offer no explanation. Michael had never mentioned making special notations or tracking anything unusual. She confirmed the handwriting was definitely her husband's, the same careful script he used for everything from grocery lists to birthday cards. The fact that he had started these mysterious recordings just days before vanishing suggested they were connected to his disappearance, but investigators could not establish how. As spring turned to summer, the investigation began to lose momentum. Despite thousands of man-hours, dozens of interviews, and exhaustive forensic examination, detectives had found no concrete evidence explaining what happened to Michael Thompson. The case remained open, but with no new leads emerging, resources were gradually redirected to other investigations. The Thompson family continued their anguished wait, holding on to hope while facing the growing likelihood that they might never learn the truth about that March night when Michael had vanished from a locked cabin, leaving behind only his half-eaten sandwich, warm coffee, and a series of cryptic codes that nobody could decipher. 3 months after Michael Thompson's disappearance, the investigation officially entered cold case status. The summer of 1988 brought no new revelations, no witnesses coming forward, no body discovered. For the Thompson family, life became an exercise in suspended grief. Jennifer faced the impossible task of moving forward while her husband remained missing, legally alive, but practically gone. Their children struggled through school, bearing the weight of unanswered questions and the stares of curious classmates. In September 1988, the railway company held a private memorial service for Michael, though without remains to bury. Colleagues attended, sharing memories of a man who had simply vanished into thin air. The service provided no closure, only a formal acknowledgement of loss. Jennifer accepted condolences while maintaining hope that somehow, someday, Michael would return or that answers would emerge. The locked cabin, the cryptic codes, the inexplicable vanishing, all remained mysteries that haunted everyone who had known him. Years passed with agonizing slowness. The case file gathered dust in police archives, periodically reviewed but never advancing. Jennifer eventually returned to work as a teacher, partly for financial necessity and partly to maintain sanity through routine. The Thompson children grew up, graduated, started their own lives, all while carrying the burden of their father's unsolved disappearance. Family gatherings were marked by an empty chair, conversations carefully avoiding the subject that consumed everyone's thoughts. The 1990s brought changes to the railway industry. The company that had employed Michael underwent restructuring, merging with a larger corporation. New management systems were implemented. Older paper records were digitized or discarded, and personnel shifted to different positions. The institutional memory of Michael Thompson's case faded as veterans retired and new employees took their places. By 1995, few people at the railway company remembered the conductor who had disappeared 7 years earlier. In the year 2000, as the new millennium began, the Thompson case remained officially open, but practically abandoned. Jennifer had learned to live with uncertainty, though she never stopped wondering. She kept Michael's belongings exactly as he had left them, his clothes still hanging in their closet, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his favorite coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet. It was a shrine to a man who existed in a liminal space between life and death, present in memory but absent from reality. The first significant development in over a decade came unexpectedly in March 2010, 22 years after Michael's disappearance. A retired railway worker named Christopher Hayes contacted the Illinois State Police with information he claimed had been troubling his conscience for years. Hayes had worked alongside Michael Thompson in the late 1980s, serving as a fellow conductor on different routes. The two men had been friendly colleagues, occasionally sharing shifts and discussing the challenges of railway work. According to Hayes, approximately 3 weeks before Michael vanished, the two had shared coffee during a shift change at Union Station. During their conversation, Michael had mentioned something that Hayes had dismissed at the time as minor workplace complaints. Michael had expressed concerns about irregularities he had noticed along certain sections of the Central Illinois line. He had not elaborated on the specific nature of these irregularities, and Hayes had not pressed for details, assuming Michael was referring to minor maintenance issues or scheduling problems that were common in railway operations. Hayes explained that after Michael's disappearance, he had briefly considered mentioning this conversation to investigators, but had convinced himself it was irrelevant. Michael had not seemed particularly worried or frightened during their talk, merely thoughtful and somewhat puzzled. Hayes had rationalized his silence by telling himself that whatever Michael had noticed surely had no connection to his vanishing. But as decades passed and the case remained unsolved, guilt had accumulated. Hayes finally decided that any information, however seemingly insignificant, deserved to be reported. Detectives reopened the investigation file and attempted to follow up on Hayes's information. They contacted former railway employees who had worked maintenance on the Central Illinois line in early 1988, seeking any records of problems, repairs, or unusual incidents. The effort proved frustrating. Many of the workers had retired, moved away, or passed away. Company records from that period were incomplete, casualties of the corporate restructuring that had occurred throughout the 1990s. The railway company's current management cooperated with the renewed investigation but could provide limited assistance. The merger and subsequent reorganization had resulted in significant loss of historical documentation. Paper files had been purged during office moves, computer systems had been upgraded multiple times with data migration issues, and the institutional knowledge had simply evaporated as personnel changed. What few records remained from 1988 showed routine maintenance activities and normal operations, nothing that would explain Michael's concerns or his disappearance. After several months of investigation, detectives reached another dead end. Without specific information about what irregularities Michael had noticed, and without documentation from that era, the renewed inquiry produced no actionable leads. The case was once again relegated to cold case status, the file updated with Hayes's statement, but no closer to resolution. Jennifer Thompson, now in her 60s, received the disappointing news with resigned acceptance. She had long ago adjusted her expectations, hoping not for her husband's return, but simply for answers before she died. The years continued to accumulate, 2015, 2020, and into 2023. Michael Thompson's disappearance became a historical curiosity, occasionally mentioned in true crime forums and unsolved mystery podcasts. Amateur detectives speculated endlessly about the locked cabin, the mysterious codes, and the vanishing conductor. Theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd: voluntary disappearance, murder, kidnapping, witness protection, even paranormal explanations. None could be proven or disproven. The case remained frozen in time, a puzzle lacking essential pieces. But something had survived the decades, buried and forgotten in a place nobody had thought to look. The irregularities that Michael Thompson had noticed, the concerns he had expressed to Christopher Hayes, the codes he had carefully recorded in his logbook, all of these were connected to physical evidence that had remained hidden for 35 years. In the spring of 2023, routine railway maintenance would finally expose what had been concealed since 1988, and the revelation would transform everything investigators thought they knew about the night Michael Thompson had vanished from that locked cabin, proving that the answers had been waiting all along in the very infrastructure he had dedicated his life to maintaining safely. April 17, 2023, marked an ordinary Monday for Daniel Martinez, a railway maintenance technician employed by Central Midwest Rail Systems. At 47 years old, Daniel had spent 2 decades working on railway infrastructure, performing the unglamorous but essential tasks that kept trains running safely. His assignment that day involved inspecting signal and switching equipment along a remote section of track outside the small town of Lexington, Illinois, the same stretch where Michael Thompson had made his final radio transmission 35 years earlier. The inspection was routine, part of the company's regular maintenance schedule. Daniel worked methodically, checking signal lights, testing switch mechanisms, and examining the weathered equipment that controlled track routing. The switching station he arrived at mid-morning was typical of dozens scattered along the rail line. A concrete pad supporting metal control boxes, surrounded by overgrown grass and accessible only by a narrow service road. These stations operated mostly automatically, requiring occasional human maintenance but functioning independently for months at a time. Daniel began his standard inspection protocol, opening access panels and checking electrical connections. The main switch box appeared normal, its exterior showing the expected wear from decades of Midwest weather. But as Daniel examined the mounting brackets, he noticed something irregular. Along the bottom edge of the primary control box, there appeared to be an additional metal panel that was not part of the original equipment specifications. The welding marks indicated this modification was old, the seams corroded and weathered to match the surrounding structure. Railway equipment modifications required extensive documentation and approval. Unauthorized changes to safety systems violated federal regulations and company policy. Daniel's training had emphasized the importance of reporting any anomalies, no matter how minor they appeared. He retrieved his inspection tools and carefully examined the suspicious panel. It was a false compartment, skillfully welded to the switch box's exterior, designed to blend with the original structure. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make this modification appear as though it had always been part of the equipment. Using a crowbar from his service truck, Daniel carefully pried open the corroded panel. The metal resisted, welded shut, and sealed against weather for what appeared to be many years. When the panel finally gave way, Daniel discovered a waterproof container wedged into the hidden compartment. The container, though aged and stained, had protected its contents from the elements. Daniel extracted it carefully, sensing he had stumbled onto something significant beyond a simple maintenance violation. Inside the container, Daniel found a collection of documents that had been deliberately preserved and hidden. There were dozens of pages, some typewritten on carbon copy paper, characteristic of 1980s office equipment. Others handwritten in neat, careful script. Photographs were included, their colors faded, but images still discernible. And there, among these mysterious materials, was an identification badge. Michael Thompson, conductor, Central Illinois Railway, with a photograph of a man in his early 40s wearing the distinctive railway uniform. Daniel immediately contacted his supervisor, who instructed him to secure the site and contact authorities. Within 2 hours, Illinois State Police arrived, followed shortly by FBI agents who had been monitoring cold cases involving railway incidents. The discovery was treated as a potential crime scene, with technicians carefully documenting the switchbox, the hidden compartment, and every item found within the container. The documents and photographs were photographed in place before being removed for detailed analysis. The documents proved to be explosive. They were records meticulously compiled by Michael Thompson during the winter and early spring of 1988. The papers documented a systematic pattern of fraudulent maintenance and safety violations occurring along multiple sections of the Central Illinois Railway line. Michael had recorded dates, times, locations, and specific equipment that had been improperly serviced or deliberately compromised. His handwritten notes described observations of maintenance crews performing superficial inspections while filing reports claiming comprehensive safety checks had been completed. The photographs provided visual evidence supporting Michael's documentation. The images showed men in work clothes conducting what appeared to be meetings near railway equipment, examining documents, and performing cursory inspections. Some photos captured equipment tags and serial numbers. Others showed maintenance vehicles and company logos. Michael had been conducting a covert investigation, gathering proof of what he had gradually realized was not simple negligence, but organized fraud. Further examination of the documents revealed the scope of the scheme Michael had uncovered. A subcontracted maintenance company had been awarded a lucrative contract to service safety equipment along the railway line. Instead of performing the required comprehensive inspections and repairs, the company had been conducting minimal work while billing for complete service. The difference between the contracted price and actual cost of their abbreviated work represented substantial profit, money that was being systematically embezzled through falsified reports and fraudulent billing. Michael's investigation had identified 3 individuals who appeared to be central to the scheme. The documents named William Carter, who had served as maintenance supervisor for the railway company, responsible for overseeing contractor performance. Robert Harris was listed as operations manager for the subcontracted maintenance firm actually performing the fraudulent work. James Mitchell appeared in the documents as a railway safety inspector whose job involved verifying that maintenance had been properly completed. All 3 men were positioned perfectly to orchestrate and conceal the fraud. The implications of this discovery were profound. The safety violations Michael had documented were serious enough to potentially cause derailments, signal failures, or catastrophic accidents. Lives had been at risk every day the fraudulent maintenance continued. Michael Thompson had clearly understood the severity of what he had uncovered and had taken extraordinary measures to document the evidence. The hidden compartment in the switchbox represented his insurance policy, a backup location for proof that would survive even if his personal copies were discovered or destroyed. Forensic analysis of the documents revealed additional crucial information. Among Michael's papers was a calendar page from March 1988 with a notation circled on March 22nd, 1 week after his disappearance. The notation read simply, Federal Railway Administration, Chicago office, 9 a.m. Michael had scheduled an appointment with federal regulators. He had planned to report the fraud to authorities who had jurisdiction over railway safety violations. The meeting he would never attend had been set for just 7 days after he vanished from that locked cabin. The chronology became clear to investigators. Michael Thompson had spent weeks covertly documenting evidence of the maintenance fraud. He had hidden his proof in multiple locations, including the switchbox compartment, anticipating that exposing such a scheme might provoke retaliation. The cryptic codes in his logbook were revealed to be location markers and equipment identification numbers, his way of tracking which systems had been compromised without creating obvious records that might be discovered. His inspection of the train's undercarriage during that final journey now took on new meaning. He had been checking safety systems, ensuring the equipment he was responsible for was functioning correctly, despite the fraudulent maintenance. As investigators processed this information, they initiated searches for William Carter, Robert Harris, and James Mitchell. They also obtained authorization to conduct ground-penetrating radar surveys and excavations in areas near the railway line, guided by maps and location markers found among Michael's hidden documents. The 35-year-old cold case had suddenly transformed into an active investigation with clear suspects and tangible evidence. And the most disturbing revelations were yet to emerge from the Illinois soil where secrets had remained buried since the night a dedicated conductor had discovered the truth and paid the ultimate price for his integrity. The discovery of Michael Thompson's hidden documentation set in motion the most intensive investigation the Illinois State Police had conducted in decades. A dedicated task force assembled in late April 2023, combining state detectives, FBI agents specializing in fraud and corruption, and railway safety investigators from the Federal Railway Administration. Their mission was to trace what had happened in 1988 and locate the individuals Michael had identified as central to the maintenance fraud scheme. Forensic document analysts worked meticulously through Michael's papers, establishing timelines and connections. The typewritten reports detailed specific instances of fraudulent maintenance occurring between November 1986 and March 1988. Each entry included location coordinates, equipment identification numbers, dates of supposed maintenance, and notes describing the actual condition of safety systems. Michael's documentation was thorough and professional, the work of someone who understood that exposing such corruption would require irrefutable evidence. The photographs found in the hidden compartment underwent enhancement and analysis. Facial recognition technology, unavailable in 1988 but standard in modern investigations, identified the individuals captured in Michael's covert surveillance. William Carter was confirmed through employment records from the railway company, his personnel file containing the same face visible in multiple photographs. Robert Harris was identified through business registration documents filed by the maintenance contracting firm. James Mitchell appeared in official railway safety inspector credentials archived by the Federal Railway Administration. Investigators began the process of locating these three men, now 35 years older than when Michael had photographed them. William Carter proved the easiest to trace, though the information brought disappointment. He had died in 1995 from heart failure, 7 years after Michael's disappearance. Carter's death meant he would never face questioning or prosecution, but his personnel records and financial history remained available for examination. Bank statements from the late 1980s revealed deposits inconsistent with his railway salary, suggesting he had been receiving payments beyond his legitimate income. Robert Harris presented a more complex search. The maintenance company he had managed ceased operations in 1990, dissolving amid what appeared to be routine business closure paperwork. Harris himself had relocated to Arizona in 1989, just months after Michael's disappearance. He had legally changed his name to Robert Henderson in 1991, a fact discovered through cross-referencing Social Security records and address histories. Currently 74 years old, Harris lived in a comfortable retirement community outside Phoenix, his lifestyle suggesting financial resources beyond what his documented work history would have provided. James Mitchell was located in a nursing care facility near Peoria, Illinois. At 81 years old, Mitchell suffered from advanced dementia, his cognitive decline having progressed to the point where he no longer recognized family members or retained memories beyond a few minutes. Medical records indicated his condition had deteriorated significantly over the past 5 years. While his location was known, his mental state meant obtaining any useful information from him directly would be impossible. However, his financial records remained intact and revealed the same pattern seen with Carter: unexplained deposits during the late 1980s that exceeded his inspector salary. The financial investigation proved crucial. Forensic accountants traced banking records, discovering a network of payments flowing from the maintenance company managed by Harris to both Carter and Mitchell during the period Michael had documented the fraud. The amounts were substantial, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars when adjusted for inflation. The paper trail showed systematic bribery, with Harris's company paying Carter and Mitchell to overlook fraudulent maintenance reports and approve safety certifications for work that had never been properly completed. Further investigation revealed the scope of the financial scheme. The maintenance company had been billing the Railway Corporation for comprehensive safety inspections and equipment servicing while performing only minimal work. The difference between contracted prices and actual expenses was significant. Over the 18 months Michael had documented, Harris's company had defrauded the railway of an estimated $3 million. Carter and Mitchell had received approximately 15% of those fraudulent proceeds in exchange for their cooperation and silence. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar surveys were conducted along sections of railway identified in Michael's documentation. The search focused on areas within a reasonable distance from where the train had been traveling when Michael vanished, particularly near switching stations and maintenance access points. The surveys covered miles of terrain, seeking any anomalies beneath the surface that might indicate disturbed earth or buried materials. On May 8, 2023, the ground-penetrating radar detected a significant anomaly approximately 3 kilometers from the main railway line in a remote area accessible only by maintenance roads. The location corresponded to coordinates marked on one of the maps found in Michael's hidden compartment. Excavation teams arrived with forensic anthropologists and crime scene technicians, prepared for what they might discover beneath the Illinois soil. The excavation proceeded carefully, with each layer of earth documented and screened for evidence. At a depth of approximately 4 feet, the team encountered fabric remnants and then skeletal remains. The bones were carefully exposed and photographed in place before removal. The skeleton was largely intact, and forensic anthropologists immediately noted characteristics consistent with an adult male. Personal effects found with the remains included a metal watch, corroded but identifiable, and fragments of a railway conductor's uniform, its distinctive buttons still recognizable despite decades underground. DNA analysis would take several weeks, but investigators were confident they had found Michael Thompson. The location, the burial depth, the personal effects, everything aligned with a deliberate concealment rather than accidental death. Forensic examination of the skeletal remains revealed evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull, indicating Michael had suffered a fatal injury to the head. The nature of the damage suggested an assault rather than an accident, confirming what investigators had begun to suspect from the moment they discovered his hidden documentation. With physical evidence now secured and the victim's fate confirmed, investigators focused intensively on Robert Harris. He was the only surviving conspirator capable of providing testimony about what had happened on March 15, 1988. Arizona authorities were contacted, and preparations began for Harris's arrest and extradition to Illinois. 35 years had passed, but the evidence was overwhelming. Michael Thompson had uncovered a criminal conspiracy, documented it meticulously, and been murdered to prevent him from exposing the truth. The investigation now turned toward reconstructing the events of that night, understanding how 3 men had managed to murder a railway conductor aboard a moving train, create the illusion of an impossible disappearance from a locked cabin, and conceal the truth for more than 3 decades. The answers would come from the man who had lived quietly in Arizona for 35 years, believing he had successfully escaped justice, unaware that the evidence buried in an Illinois field and hidden in a railway switchbox would eventually reveal every detail of the crime he had hoped was buried forever alongside Michael Thompson's remains. On May 15, 2023, Arizona law enforcement officers arrested Robert Harris at his Phoenix retirement community. The 74-year-old man expressed shock and confusion as detectives presented him with arrest warrants charging him with murder, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Harris was extradited to Illinois within 48 hours, where he faced interrogation by the task force that had spent weeks preparing for this moment. The interrogation strategy was carefully planned. Investigators presented Harris with the overwhelming evidence, piece by piece. Michael Thompson's meticulously documented fraud investigation, the photographs showing Harris and his co-conspirators, the financial records proving systematic bribery, and finally, the forensic evidence from Michael's remains. Confronted with proof that left no room for denial, Harris's resistance gradually collapsed. After consulting with his attorney and facing the reality of irrefutable evidence, he agreed to provide a full statement in exchange for prosecutors removing the death penalty from consideration. Harris's confession filled in the devastating details that had remained unknown for 35 years. According to his account, Michael Thompson had contacted him directly in early March 1988. The conductor had presented evidence of the fraudulent maintenance scheme and demanded that Harris cooperate with federal investigators. Michael had made clear he had documented everything and hidden copies of his evidence in secure locations. He intended to report the fraud to the Federal Railway Administration regardless of whether Harris cooperated, but he offered Harris the opportunity to minimize his culpability by turning state's witness against Carter and Mitchell. Harris had requested time to consider Michael's ultimatum, but instead used those days to coordinate with Carter and Mitchell. The 3 conspirators recognized that if Michael's evidence reached federal authorities, they faced not only financial ruin, but criminal prosecution. The safety violations they had enabled could be linked to track failures, and at least 2 minor derailments that had occurred during the period of fraudulent maintenance. Criminal charges could include endangerment of public safety, potentially carrying decades of prison time. On the evening of March 15, 1988, Carter and Harris arranged to intercept Michael during his shift. They used their knowledge of railway operations to board the train at Pontiac during a routine stop, accessing the locomotive through maintenance credentials that Carter possessed as a railway supervisor. They confronted Michael in his cabin, demanding he turn over all copies of his documentation and abandon his planned report to federal authorities. When Michael refused and attempted to radio for security assistance, a physical altercation ensued. Harris described Carter as the one who had struck Michael during the struggle, using a heavy flashlight to deliver the fatal blow. The assault had not been premeditated murder, Harris insisted, but rather an escalation of physical confrontation when Michael tried to call for help. However, intent mattered little once Michael lay dead in the conductor's cabin while the train continued moving along its route. Carter and Harris faced an immediate crisis requiring quick decisions. James Mitchell, who had been waiting in a vehicle at a predetermined location along the railway line, had been monitoring radio communications. When Carter and Harris signaled their emergency situation, Mitchell drove to a maintenance access point where the train could be stopped without attracting attention. The three conspirators used their combined knowledge of railway systems to bring the train to a temporary halt in a remote section, claiming a signal malfunction that required immediate inspection. The next portion of Harris's confession explained the seemingly impossible locked cabin mystery. The three men removed Michael's body from the train, using the darkness and remote location to avoid detection. Mitchell, with his inspector credentials and specialized tools, knew how to manipulate the cabin door's internal locking mechanism from the outside. After removing the body, they engaged the lock using a narrow tool inserted through the door's edge seal, creating the illusion that Michael had been alone in a locked room when he vanished. The train was then remotely restarted using emergency override protocols that Mitchell knew as a safety inspector. The automatic systems brought the train to its final destination, where the mystery of the missing conductor in the locked cabin would baffle investigators, just as the conspirators had planned. Meanwhile, the three men transported Michael's body to the burial location identified in his own documentation, a remote area whose coordinates Michael had noted as a switching station requiring maintenance inspection. They interred him there that same night, believing the location would never be associated with Michael's disappearance from a train miles away. Harris claimed he had wanted to confess many times over the decades, but feared prosecution and relied on Carter and Mitchell maintaining their silence. When Carter died in 1995, Harris felt somewhat safer, as one witness to the crime was gone. Mitchell's cognitive decline in recent years had eliminated the final person besides Harris who could provide testimony. Harris had convinced himself the case would never be solved, that Michael Thompson's disappearance would remain an eternal mystery. The discovery of the hidden compartment had shattered that illusion. DNA analysis confirmed that the remains excavated from the burial site were indeed Michael Thompson, providing scientific certainty to supplement Harris's confession. The cause of death was officially determined to be blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with Harris's account of the assault. Forensic evidence from the remains matched details in Harris's statement, including the timeline and circumstances of death. The legal proceedings moved forward swiftly. In November 2023, Robert Harris pleaded guilty to charges of second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. In exchange for his cooperation and detailed confession, prosecutors agreed to a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Given Harris's age, the sentence effectively meant he would spend his remaining years incarcerated, though he had avoided a life sentence without parole or capital punishment that first-degree murder charges might have carried. James Mitchell, though identified as a participant in the crime, was deemed incompetent to stand trial due to his advanced dementia. Legal and medical evaluations confirmed he lacked the cognitive capacity to understand the charges against him or assist in his own defense. While this prevented prosecution, his role in the conspiracy was officially documented, and his estate faced civil liability for his participation in Michael Thompson's murder. For the Thompson family, the resolution brought agonizing closure. Jennifer Thompson, now 77 years old, finally learned the truth about what had happened to her husband 35 years earlier. Michael had not abandoned his family, had not fled from responsibilities, had not met with an inexplicable accident. He had been murdered for his integrity, killed because he refused to ignore corruption that endangered public safety. His hidden documentation had ensured that even death could not prevent the truth from eventually emerging. In December 2023, Michael Thompson received a proper burial in Oak Park, Illinois. The ceremony was attended by family, former colleagues, and law enforcement officials who had worked the case across 3 decades. Railway workers from across the region came to honor a man who had exemplified the dedication and integrity their profession required. Jennifer Thompson spoke briefly, expressing gratitude that her decades of uncertainty had ended and that her husband's courage had finally been recognized. The Federal Railway Administration implemented new safety protocols in Michael's name, establishing stronger oversight mechanisms for contracted maintenance work and anonymous reporting systems for employees who observed safety violations. The Thompson family received financial compensation through civil litigation against the estates of the conspirators and the corporate successors of the companies involved in the fraud scheme. The case of Michael Thompson became a touchstone in discussions of whistleblower protection and the importance of supporting those who report corruption. His hidden documentation, preserved for 35 years in a switchbox along the railway line he had served faithfully, had accomplished exactly what he had intended. The truth emerged, justice was served, and the man who had vanished from a locked cabin aboard a moving train finally came home, his integrity intact and his sacrifice acknowledged. The conductor's last journey had ended not in mystery but in vindication, proving that even the most carefully concealed truths eventually find their way to light.